This video will deviate from the usual reviews and also from the sporadic rankings that I have uploaded in the past. To be honest, I considered to also make a ranking video of Peter F. Hamilton's Confederation universe, but I decided against it, since there are only 3 serious contenders, namely the books of the Nightstone Trilogy. A Second Chance at Eden as a short story collection would have made 4th place in all likelihood, and the 3 aforementioned novels are quite similar, primarily due to the fact that they tell an uninterrupted story, unlike, for example, the Culture series. There is just not a lot to talk about when it comes to rankings and comparing personal preference to the combined ratings when it comes to the Confederation books. Nonetheless, there still remained quite a few thoughts and ideas related to the Nightstone Trilogy that I did not fully develop, that I did not express due to spoiler concerns, and that are related to certain narrative threads that span the entirety of the trilogy and therefore did not fit into the quote-unquote normal format of the reviews either. So with that little bit of housekeeping out of the way, let us jump headlong into my thoughts, or rather ramblings, related to the entirety of the Nightstone Trilogy. Oh, and if you have not deduced it by now, this whole video will be riddled with major spoilers regarding the Reality Dysfunction, the Neutronium Alchemist, and the Naked God. Throw in a Second Chance at Eden for good measure as well. As per usual, you have been warned, so beware. One thing that stood out to me in particular after having read several of the series written by Peter F. Hamilton is his mastery in world building. This is in no small part due to the fact that he tends to develop his fictional worlds starting from a fictional technological foundation, which in turn is limited by certain economic considerations. Only then do the societal boundary conditions in which the actual story takes place take their shape and form. To illustrate this point, let us compare the Commonwealth universe specifically depicted in Pandora's Star to the situation in the Confederation universe, namely at the beginning of the Reality Dysfunction. In the Commonwealth, travel between planets is quite easy, literally just a train ride away through an interstellar portal and not substantially limited either by cost or time. Expansion into the wider galaxy, while still incurring some investment, is therefore widely performed, and the vast majority of the population of the Commonwealth is able to find a home planet with the economic model, customs or ethnicity of their liking. Combined with the prospect of centuries of life expectancy thanks to rejuvenation technology, the Commonwealth is quite utopian, while at the same time mostly avoiding the creepy undertones that are usually inherent to utopias in fiction. Furthermore, the concept of underdeveloped planets is also not really a thing in the Commonwealth. There are rural, sparsely inhabited planets, but their populations tend to have access to and enjoy the current technology. In contrast, in the Confederation, interstellar travel occurs via spaceships jumping vast distances through space and having to adjust their relative velocity via more traditional means of propulsion. Thus, it is a more costly, time-consuming and dangerous affair. As a consequence, the tiers in development between the worlds of the Confederation are way more pronounced, since backwater colony worlds, such as the jungle world of Lalonde, require tedious logistical efforts and thus investments to advance further. Thus, Lalonde's population is reliant on seemingly antiquated methods of transportation, such as boats traveling up and down the vast river networks, transporting goods and people. The people choosing to embark in interstellar travel are either part of the military or government, merchants, parts of the upper class, or colonists leaving their home planet, and eventually also convicts as involuntary and cheap labor. In essence, in the Confederation, interstellar travel is more akin to crossing oceans and continents in the 19th century on Earth. Whereas in the Commonwealth, interstellar travel is a comparatively comfortable affair, such as an intercontinental flight in the Concorde, for example. To some, the mechanics of the fictional technology might be a minor point, but I think it is worth mentioning it since it heavily influences the entirety of the world building. Comparing Hamilton's different universes in this regard allows to highlight this specific effect, since style differences, if we had compared the works of different authors for example, can be minimized in this way. After having read the series twice and also having uploaded review videos related to the 3 novels of the trilogy, I am still unsure whether Peter F. Hamilton intentionally or unintentionally added misdirection in some of the narrative threads or not. The most obvious misdirection has to be Layton's story arc. In the novel The Reality Dysfunction, before the actual reality dysfunction takes place to be precise, it was heavily implied that Layton and his followers, who were secretly hiding in the jungles of Lalonde, would be the main antagonists of the entire trilogy. And why not? A rogue group of Edenists being responsible for the only destruction of a habitat in history and thus the death of 1 million innocent people, which is now trying to subjugate life itself via a virus, makes for a good antagonistic faction. Or so it would seem. In retrospect, it is quite surprising how fast and unceremoniously Layton's group is dispatched with via the Possessed. It is true that Layton plays 2 important roles after the introduction of the Possessed. First, his confirmed presence on Lalonde and eventual departure from the planet leads most of the relevant factions of the Confederation to the assumption that the unrest and chaos on Lalonde is caused by him and not the dead haunting the living. Second, Layton is instrumental in rectifying this erroneous assumption, at least to the Edenists, who in turn are able to prepare themselves appropriately. It could also be argued that Layton redeems himself in the process. Nonetheless, when reading the trilogy for the first time, one would assume that Layton and his megalomaniac plans would take center stage and not be relegated to a side plot at best. Whether Peter F. Hamilton initially had other plans with Layton remains still a mystery to me. What do you think? Another interesting aspect of the Nightstone trilogy is what can only be described as the mechanics of death. At first, little is known of how possession occurs, what the motivations of the possessed are, and what the Beyond actually is. The Beyond as a purgatory for those souls who have still unfinished business, where the souls are tortured by the absence of any stimuli, save for involuntarily sharing memories with each other, offers quite a lot from a storytelling perspective. For one, it allows for the creation of captivating antagonists, anti-heroes and anti-villains, which have their own motivations and goals. This is particularly the case in the last 2 novels of the trilogy. But more on that later. Apart from that, the existence of the Beyond opens up the possibility for the possessed to transmit important intelligence by suicide, and further complicates the strategic planning of the Confederation, since the death of anyone knowing classified information will eventually leak the secrets to the possessed via the Beyond. One particular example relates to the working principles of the Neutronium Alchemist, where anyone who knows about it must avoid death, not just by their own motivation, but also specifically to keep this weapon of mass destruction out of the hands of the possessed. The mechanics of death are therefore a pivotal and central part of the Nightstone trilogy. However, the addition of further planes of existence, while necessary to propel the plot in some instances, though not always, feels a bit more contrived in comparison. Throughout my review videos, I have frequently mentioned that the Nightstone trilogy struggles with some poor character development, specifically at the beginning. Most of it can be rectified. As one example, Joshua Calvert, one of the protagonists, comes off as a bit bratty and borderline annoying in the beginning, only to develop throughout the series. Maybe not to a brilliant character, but to a more than serviceable protagonist. On the other hand, we have Quinn Dexter, who started out as a dark, yet intriguing and interesting main character, only to revert to the one-dimensional role of the unapologetically evil villain, whose deranged plans need to be stopped at all cost. In my view, this is wasted potential. However, it is more than compensated by the subsequent addition of other quote-unquote bad characters, or rather antagonists, usually in the form of the possessed. They have their own motivations and goals, as mentioned previously, from the basic desire to escape the torturous beyond, all the way to fulfilling their egoistic dreams of ambition, which they were not able to obtain in their previous lives. These antagonists give us important insights regarding the nature of the beyond and the common fears and desires of all possessed. Without these various perspectives, the Nightstone Trilogy would have become a rather dull book series, to be honest. Thus, in a way, while the absence of badly written characters is the ideal, the next best thing is to add a bunch of good characters for compensation. Plot-wise, one thing that negatively stood out to me was the explanation for the separation between Adamists who avoid biotechnology purportedly due to religious and cultural reasons, and the Edenists who embraced conscious biotechnological constructs, namely the habitats and ships. Furthermore, Edenists are linked via affinity, a type of telepathy, with their biotechnological constructs and with each other, although they still retain their individuality. The most important point, though, is that Edenists can upload their conscience after death into their habitat, essentially becoming immortal. In the final book, The Naked God, the reason for the Adamists not craving for some type of this technology is explained by the existence of a shadowy group of earthbound elites wanting to keep this technologically derived immortality to themselves. Thus, they use their influence to foster the aforementioned religious and cultural stigma against biotechnology. Frankly, I think this is a weak explanation. Indeed, I could understand that most people would not want to live in a hive mind-like society only to obtain eventual immortality. However, there are examples of independent habitats using biotechnology while not following the tenets of Edenism. Hence, the drive for immortality would sooner or later lead a sizable amount of Adamists to adopt biotechnology without necessarily converting to Edenism, thus leading to the creation of a third branch of humanity. The situation with Adamists and Edenists separated neatly just does not strike me as a stable equilibrium, especially for several centuries. Also, the existence of a shadowy cabal that manipulates and controls the majority of the population is a rather unoriginal trope. One could argue that the ending to the trilogy is just a deus ex machina. This is actually a true assessment, but we have to bear in mind that a deus ex machina is not necessarily a bad thing. In recent years, however, a deus ex machina has garnered some negative connotation and is perceived usually as lazy writing. I would say that Peter F. Hamilton manages to incorporate a form of a deus ex machina rather well into the story, and there are several reasons for that. First, he introduces other potential resolutions to the conflict, such as intervention via the alien key-int, or through the development and deployment of the so-called Soul Killer device, to name two obvious examples. Second, the Naked God as an all-powerful alien entity does not come out of nowhere, but is instead already alluded to in the first half of the trilogy, and, as it turns out, reaching it takes quite some effort. Third, the ultimate resolution wraps up most plot points. It gives a rather poetic explanation regarding the existence of souls, the beyond, and the natural order of things, for lack of a better word. And while the naked god averts the acute possession crisis, it, or rather the resolution chosen by Joshua, forces humanity to face and solve its inner problems, rather than exporting them to other parts of the galaxy through colonization. Humanity, stretching several hundred colonized star systems, which are now in a globular cluster far away from the Milky Way, has to fundamentally change. This final point is also one reason why I am a bit skeptical whether Peter F. Hamilton will be able to continue writing new novels in the Confederation universe. But who knows? If anyone is able to put it off, it is Hamilton. Well, this concludes my leftover ramblings and thoughts that I was not able to convey in any of the other review videos that I uploaded related to Peter F. Hamilton's Night Dawn trilogy. Is there anything that you would add or that I missed? Please let me know. If you liked this video, you may also enjoy the other reviews and content on my channel. Feel free to leave a comment if you want to discuss the novels or if you want to suggest other books that I should review in the future. Please consider upvoting and subscribing, it is much appreciated. Thank you for watching and until next time.